And now on the line is Barry Grant from Extern Problem Gambling. Barry, welcome back to Near FM.
Thanks a million, Darren, for having me on.
Okay, Barry, we did our first interview together on Near FM almost 7 years ago, and I last spoke to you on the station in January of this year. All of our interviews over the last nearly 7 years, Barry, have been on your call and the call of others for there to be some kind of gambling control legislation in Ireland. And Barry, only in the last week or so, there is, as far as you and some others are concerned, on this legislation, fantastic news, isn't there?
Yeah, great news, and it's a huge relief to see it get over the line, especially seeing as we're so close to a general election. It's great to see Minister James Brown, put a huge amount of work into making sure that the Gambling Regulation Bill was enacted, or the Gambling Regulation Act, as I should now call it. So that's a huge step forward, because we've been waiting for a long time and campaigning for a long time to see that happen. So it's a great piece of news to see that finally finished.
I have to say, Barry, fair play to you for sticking to the advocacy on the need for this legislation for so long. Barry, who else deserves recognition for bringing in this legislation, do you think?
Well, I think Minister Brown, first and foremost, and also he mentioned the previous minister, David Stanton, who did put a lot of the preparatory work into getting this ready. The likes of Colin O'Gara, my friend and former colleague here at Extern, Tony O'Reilly, and many others. I don't want to leave people's names out, but there's a lot of people who've been campaigning over the years to try and get this over the line. So it's great to see it finally getting there.
Okay, Barry, what are the next stages until the gambling regulator is up and running properly, do you think?
Well, just in the last couple of days, I've seen on publicjobs.ie, they've been advertising for board members of the Gambling Regulatory Authority, so they're straight out the traps there, getting that ready. That's essential to have the board in place. So they were really quick in getting that done. And they've also advertised for a person to develop and implement the social fund, which is a really key part of the Act, which is going to be a levy on gambling industry turnover. And that money is going to be ring-fenced to provide research, treatment, prevention and education services in the gambling harms space. So, there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, the Gambling Regulatory Authority will be taking over the licensing function from Revenue. Revenue are currently in charge of all gambling licenses. So there's a big piece of work in making that transfer happen. And I imagine that's probably their first job of work. But there's other important work, like I mentioned there, going on in the background. But it's going to take time. But I mean, they've been very quick getting some of the really important work started already.
I know that the lady that heads up, she's a gambling regulator herself, the woman who heads up the board, Miss Amry Coffield, she was revealed to be in charge 2 years ago. Just thinking now, Barry, the board that she has, are these going to be full-time positions, or what's the story, do you know?
No, it'd be like any other state board for any kind of state body. So they're part-time roles generally. They would be required to meet a number of times a year. So they would not be full-time positions.
So, okay, is Amry Coffield herself the gambling regulator, or is she just the kind of CEO of the Gambling Regulator Authority? You know what I mean?
Amry Coffield is the CEO.
Okay.
Well, I think she might even be currently the CEO designate until it's fully formed as an organisation of the Gambling Regulatory Authority. Yeah.
So she isn't herself the gambling regulator.
Well, no, the regulator is the entire organisation, and I think it's predicted that there will be up to 100 full-time staff when they're fully up and running.
That's fantastic, yeah. I asked you this before, Barry, and I believe you told me in an interview over a year ago that slot machines are illegal in pubs and hotels in Ireland, but they can still be seen in some pubs and hotels in Ireland today. Is this an area that the gambling regulator should be covering, do you think?
Yeah, well, under the legislation, if I understand it correctly, it's a very, very long document. But licensing is one of the primary functions of the regulator. So if you don't have a license to operate as a gambling premises, you cannot do that. And under the legislation, going way, way back, I think even to the 1950s, there's a prohibition on having gaming machines in venues that are licensed to sell alcohol. So I don't believe there's been any change there. So it should be impossible for a bar, say, to obtain a license to operate a gaming machine. So we could see a situation in the future where individuals might put in complaints against bars that have gaming machines in them, and then the regulator would act on that or enforce that. But it remains to be seen what exactly that's going to look like.
Yeah, the fund you talked about, the social fund, I think that's fantastic. Uh, okay, and you mentioned their licensing. Is there anything else, Barry, that you imagine the gambling regulator and her board will be doing when they're up and running that you haven't already mentioned?
Well, there's a huge amount in terms of what in some jurisdictions they would call player protection. And there are elements within the Act that will protect gambling consumers, gambling customers, and the general public. So there's a ban on credit card gambling. That's huge, and even extends to any other forms of credit, or a ban from, say, online gambling companies allowing customers to use a credit card to load up their PayPal and do it that way. There's a ban on there's a watershed ban on gambling advertising on TV and radio. So that means between the hours of 5:30 a.m. and 9 p.m. there will be no gambling ads across TV and radio. There's also essentially a ban on gambling ads across the board on social media, unless the person follows a gambling company's social media account. So if you follow the Paddy Power account on Instagram, then you will see gambling ads from Paddy Power. But for the average person, or the vast majority of the population who do not follow gambling companies on social media, they should, under the new legislation, when it's fully in place or fully enforced, they should see no gambling advertising at all on social media. So there's a huge amount in terms of the public health side, the player protection side, so protection of people who gamble, and just protection of the general population as well. And also, one other thing on the player protection side is the legislation brings in a multi-operator self-exclusion scheme. So currently, a person can self-exclude from an individual gambling company that they have an account with. And quite often what we would see with the people who use our counselling services, they'd self-exclude from one, and then days or weeks or months later, they relapse and they open up a new account with a different company, and on it goes. But under the multi-operator self-exclusion scheme, you'd be able to go to the regulator's website when they have that set up and say, please exclude me from opening accounts with any licensed online gambling company that's licensed in Ireland. So it'll essentially be a blanket ban for those people who want that or who need it as part of their recovery.
That's fantastic. I didn't know that. It's fantastic, I think, as well, about advertising. Like, there's going to be a ban on during most of the day on mainstream media, and you're saying there are social media as well. I think I really have a kind of appreciation for the effects of the potential when it comes to advertising and marketing, like not just for gambling, but for alcohol and other drugs as well. Marketing is such a huge issue, and it's very successful for companies across a range of areas. Okay, Barry, it was great talking to you today again on the RFM for the first time since the beginning of the year. And Now that the Gambling Regulation Act has been passed, will you be out of a job, as it were, as you might not be needed to advocate publicly as much on the issue of problem gambling?
Well, look, my primary job is a gambling addiction counsellor, so unfortunately, I doubt I'll ever be out of a job on that front. On the advocacy side, I hope that I don't have to spend as much time away from my real job doing advocacy and campaigning now that the legislation is through. But look, I imagine that as things progress and we see which elements of the legislation are working really well and which elements might need to be improved, there might be scope for further advocacy and campaigning down the line. But look, we need to give the Gambling Regulatory Authority time to get set up and running and operational and see how everything is working. And then we might, hopefully not, but we might have to return to that at some point down the line.